So it seems like a lot of industries are having supply chain issues right now, about halfway through 2021, and it's definitely affecting us at Kaiser as far as blasting and coatings are concerned. So the first thing that we saw that affected us was that most of our customers, pretty much dang near all of them, are steel fabricators or metal fabricators. So the materials that they're using are generally stainless steel or aluminum, and that's what we're coating. And they were having issues, and still are, but for a while it was worse. They were having issues getting materials in so they could build their products. And so then there was a lot of projects put on hold or pushed back and set behind that we were supposed to be coating, but they couldn't even get the parts made because they couldn't get the raw materials in, the raw metals in to make the parts. So we were faced with that for a little bit, and just kind of had a lull and weren't quite as busy for a while. Actually, that probably affected us the most in terms if you compared like COVID versus like how that affected us and how that affected our workflow back in 2020 compared to how the supply chain issues are affecting us now. I say the supply chain stuff probably affected us more just because once our customers couldn't make their parts, then obviously we can't coat them if they're not made. So that was the first thing that we saw. Now we're just seeing, now we're kind of experiencing it ourselves. So when we're through our suppliers, just when we're trying to go buy materials, there's been some issues. And it's mostly just because it seems to me that stuff's just out of stock. They ran out. I think some logistics issues happened with the containers, or they got stuck down in the canal. I'm trying to remember what the name of that was, but then that happened. I feel like it's probably almost been 2 months ago now, but that caused some issues with just shipping logistics. But then it's just, I think everybody finally is just kind of getting behind or running out of stock, and they're just maybe not back up to full production like they used to be pre-COVID. And so some of the stuff that we're running into issues with, like which suppliers or which supplies, it hasn't affected powder so much. Paint, it has affected pretty significantly. We haven't run out of paint, but there's been quite a bit of restriction on what we can and can't buy, just because they're trying to control, multiple different paint companies are trying to control their supply just to make sure they don't run out. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, not being able to order as much as we need, or kind of have to spread out our orders over time. And obviously that slows us down and delays us. Another big one for us that it's affecting everybody, I think, is foams and plastics, anything with like poly in it, polyester. But yeah, one of the main things that we're seeing is just packaging for us. Foam is one of the big things that we use to package, and if we don't have foam, then we can't really package stuff safely and ship it out. And that's a big one that is in pretty scarce supply. No matter where you go to try to find and order it, it's hard to get. And then because of that, the price is going up. Another big one that's affecting us, that probably would surprise most, is just lumber. And so wood. And even though that all's typically we only coat metal, we're not coating wood. We use wood and what we would call dunnage for packaging a lot of things, because we're doing very large pieces of equipment or railings or whatever, and so in order to package that safely, you need dunnage in between the parts, and we wrap that dunnage in foam. And it's hard to get dunnage lumber right now, and if you can get it and get a hold of it, it's extremely expensive, like to the tune of 3 times what it was a year ago. And so that's a big deal, because usually packaging costs are pretty small in the grand scheme of things for us, as far as like how much that material costs in like in the whole quote for us. That's usually the smallest side, but actually now it's becoming the most expensive part, because foam is hard to get, so it's expensive, and dunnage is hard to get, so, and it's also very expensive if you can get it. And so when we're talking like 3 times the amount of costs in both those areas, like our packaging is just shot up like crazy, our packaging costs. And it's like we can't just forego it, because then parts are just going to get damaged. Like, we still have to package them well. So that's kind of an issue that we're seeing, and we're probably going to have to start passing along some of those costs to our customers. We're trying to figure out ways to not do that, and search for other supply elsewhere, away from maybe our typical suppliers, just to see if we can try to maintain price. But pretty much everywhere you go, the cost of those supplies have gone up. So those would be the 3 main things: is foam for packaging, shrink wrap, and then wood and paint. And I expect there'll probably be other supplies that are hard to come by. I expect that to be upcoming. I don't know which ones it'll be, but I'm just kind of prepared that it'll probably happen. And because of all these shortages, pricing for our materials is going up, which means that we'll probably end up having to raise our prices at some point. And I mean, it's pretty basic economics, supply and demand. You know, supply is low, demand is high, so that means price goes up. That's just how it works. So it's kind of to be expected, because the demand is not down for any of these supplies. It might be up actually, because all of a sudden now, you know, it's a lot of people are getting vaccinated, and a lot of mask mandates are going away, and other social distancing mandates are going away. So it feels like everything in our area, at least around Nebraska, is opening back up, and so everybody is gonna start ordering stuff again, and everybody's gonna get really busy again. So demand, I think, is gonna be really high and continuing to get higher. But then the supply just isn't quite there yet. The supply isn't quite caught up, and so prices are going to go up, and then they'll come back down. But I think it's good to point out, or good to highlight, as far as I'm concerned, or what I've been privy to, it doesn't have seemed to affect the supply of the actual powder that we're spraying, which is the majority of the coatings that we do. I haven't had any suppliers like limit us on what we can order, or be like out of a lot of powder and then we can't get it. That hasn't happened yet anyway. Maybe it will happen. There's been some price increases, but I think pretty much pricing is increasing for almost everything across the board, just in every industry. But they haven't really been significant. They've been pretty much along the typical lines of what typical yearly price increases would be. So that's a silver lining for us, since most of the coatings that we do is powder coating. It seems like that supply is pretty stable and hasn't had much issue with it. It's just some of the other materials that go into our processes. Pre-treatment chemicals, I haven't heard much. I haven't had any restrictions on what I've been able to order. I haven't had any issues with getting it or that it's out of stock, and pricing seems relatively stable as far as I've been aware from the suppliers that we're using, so that's been good. So the pre-treatment and the actual powder coating side of things for us, as far as how these supply chain issues have been affecting, we haven't had much issue there, so that's been a good thing. I expect that it probably will continue for the rest of 2021 to see shortages in certain areas and struggles to get things in, which can affect our lead time. We're trying to make sure we have enough stock of things to make sure that we don't run out, but if we get really busy, which I think we're already getting pretty darn busy, I think we're going to get busier, and that means we're going to be using even more materials than we normally do, and it's harder and harder to get them, it seems, right now. So there could be, hopefully we don't run out of things, but we might. So then that'll definitely affect our lead times. I feel like just everybody in the manufacturing industry anyway is kind of experiencing their own supply chain issues that are kind of specific to them, but everybody's kind of aware that, you know, it's affecting our processes, it's affecting everybody's process. So everybody's been pretty good to work with and lenient on that. It is, you know, it is what it is. There's not a lot that we can do about it. We haven't, but again, silver lining for us is we haven't had anything like to the point where we're out of it, we can't get it for a long period of time, so we just like have to halt certain projects. We haven't had to do that yet, so we've been lucky with that. An interesting topic to bring up when we're talking about supply chain issues and having shortages and having a hard time getting things that you normally get, or that you can normally get easily, is switching suppliers or having to get from a new supplier, and how that can really affect and change how everything works. For example, when metal was really, really in short supply and our customers were just trying to get metal wherever they could get it so they could fabricate, that meant that they were getting their metals from different places than they normally do, which means there's different greases and oils on those metals. And so we had some issues with fish eyes and things like that, because we were using the same pre-treatment process we've been used to using, and now the greases and oils that are on these metals are different than what we normally were used to. So we had to adjust our pre-treatment processes to make sure we could get everything clean again. So that was an interesting challenge that came up. And then even when we're buying, let's say, our packaging from our typical supplier that we buy it to, you know, they're kind of more or less a dealer, and so they're pretty much ordering in from like extreme bulk, from really big, let's say, foam and shrink wrap companies, and so when they're going to order their stuff, they might be having to switch supplier from like the main supplier of the foam. They might be having to adjust between the 2 or 3 that are out there. And so when they do that, we get a little bit different quality that we're maybe not used to, or it's just a little different, and that could leave imprints, you know, or residue on the parts if it's a different foam. For shrink wrap, it could be that it just tears super easy and doesn't wrap tight enough and doesn't keep the parts tight enough on the pallet, so then we have damage in shipping. So it's just that's probably more of what we're dealing with right now. It's less that we're like out of things and can't get them. It's just the quality of materials that we're getting. They're not bad. They're just different from what we're used to. And it's just kind of some of those like unforeseen problems that are just coming up. Little things lead to big things. And when we're having some issues in our processes now, or whether that's like in-house while we're pre-treating and coating, or after parts have shipped and been packaged, and then we may get a picture or something that like it's not staying packaged properly or whatever. One of my considerations right now is like, okay, what supplies were used when we did that project, when did we do it, and then try to trace back, kind of what batches did the materials come out of, because that's having an effect a little bit. It hasn't been too bad yet, but I've noticed that it has affected some of our stuff. Not negatively yet. I've just noticed differences in some of the materials we've been getting in, and trying to keep a close watch on that, because we don't really have much control. Just for example, if for some reason it wasn't as thick, or maybe had some residue on it, there really isn't another option right now to be like picky and say, hey, we're going to send this back. This isn't good enough quality. Because the answer we probably get is, well, there isn't anything else available, so either you use that or you don't have anything. So that's interesting, and I think everyone is dealing with it. It's kind of, the hard part is that, deadlines are still there and people are still trying to push really hard. But I feel like 9 out of 10 people understand the issues at hand, and then there's the 1 out of 10 that maybe understand it but are just extremely frustrated and want to just keep pushing forward really hard. But sometimes we're running into roadblocks with the supply chain stuff, so hopefully it'll get better. It will eventually, but we just have to work through it for now.